Germany made war movies that shook the world, then buried them. Films so impactful they caused walkouts, protests in theaters, and government inquiries. Movies restricted in their own country, criticized as Nazi propaganda in others, and sometimes both simultaneously. While Hollywood polished heroic American narratives, German filmmakers wrestled with their nation's darkest chapter through cinema that was brutal, unflinching, and often difficult to watch. Let's talk about 10 controversial German World War II films that changed how we see history. Das Boot, 1981. Das Boot is the submarine thriller that forced audiences to sympathize with the enemy. Director Wolfgang Petersen created the ultimate claustrophobic nightmare following a German U-boat crew fighting for survival in the Atlantic. What makes it controversial? It shows German sailors as ordinary men, not fanatical Nazis, completely upending how Americans were used to seeing World War II Germans on screen. The film never mentions the Holocaust or Nazi atrocities, focusing entirely on the terrified submariners fighting a losing battle against Allied depth charges. The production was extremely challenging. Petersen built a full-scale, perfectly accurate U-boat interior that was deliberately uncomfortable. The cast was forbidden from going outside during filming to maintain their pale, exhausted look. They lived in that metal tube for months, using real working instruments, enduring genuine claustrophobia and exhaustion. Actor Jürgen Prochnow later said, "We weren't acting anymore. We were those men." The sound design alone took a year to complete, with Petersen insisting on authentic ping sounds, depth charge explosions, and the creaking of a submarine under pressure. During one particularly intense scene, an actor had a genuine panic attack when water flooded the set, creating real fear that made it into the final cut. Critics were deeply divided. German newspapers praised it for showing war's futility, while some Allied veterans groups condemned it for humanizing the enemy. Roger Ebert called it one of the most authentic war films ever made, while British newspaper The Guardian accused it of stealth revisionism by portraying German military personnel sympathetically. The film exists in multiple versions, from the 149-minute theatrical cut to the massive 293-minute version shown on German television. But the real controversy came later, when American studios wanted to remake it with Tom Cruise, a proposal that caused such outrage in Germany that producers abandoned the idea entirely. The film's unrelenting intensity took a toll on audiences. During screenings, people reportedly suffered anxiety attacks during the depth charge sequences. Several theaters kept paramedics on standby after viewers became overwhelmed from the claustrophobic tension. Perhaps most telling was what happened when real U-boat veterans saw it. Several reportedly broke down in tears, saying Petersen had captured their experience so perfectly they felt like they were back in the war. One veteran simply said, "That was our life." That was it, exactly. Only 1-inch 10 German submariners survived the war, a statistic that Das Boot forces viewers to contemplate while watching men they've grown to care about face almost certain death. Downfall, 2004. Downfall crossed the ultimate taboo in German cinema. It portrayed Adolf Hitler as a human being. The film takes place in Hitler's bunker during the final days of the war, showing the Nazi leader's mental collapse as Berlin falls. When Bruno Ganz first appeared on screen as a frail, trembling Hitler with Parkinson's symptoms, German audiences gasped. This wasn't the ranting monster of propaganda films. This was a broken man facing the end. The film depicts Hitler's mundane daily routine, his vegetarian meals, playing with his dog Blondie, his relationship with Eva Braun, alongside his genocidal rage and delusions. Director Oliver Hirschbiegel knew exactly what he was doing. To show Hitler as a human being is to destroy the myth, he explained. Monsters don't exist. Only humans exist. The controversy exploded instantly. Holocaust survivors condemned the film for creating sympathy, while German critics argued showing Hitler's humanity made his evil more terrifying, not less. The German weekly Der Spiegel ran a cover story asking, Are We Allowed to Show Hitler as a Human? Actor Bruno Ganz spent 4 months preparing for the role, studying rare footage of Hitler's private conversations where his Parkinson's symptoms were visible, and working with a voice coach to perfect the Austrian accent and distinctive speaking style. The film's most infamous scene, Hitler's rage at realizing the war is lost, became an internet meme with endless parodies that troubled the filmmakers. Ganz himself expressed disappointment at how his careful performance had been trivialized online. "I worked for 4 months on that scene," he said. "I studied footage of Hitler having a breakdown to get it right." The scene's transformation into a comedy template created an ethical dilemma that film scholars still debate. Does the meme normalize Hitler or further diminish his power by turning him into a joke? What truly shocked audiences was learning how ordinary the bunker experience was. Hitler discussing his vegetarian diet, petting his dog, speaking kindly to his secretary, all while ordering suicidal last stands that killed thousands. The film shows Hitler tenderly saying goodbye to his female staff before his suicide, juxtaposed with his order that the German people should perish for failing him. Most disturbing was the true story of the Goebbels family, shown in distressing detail as Magda Goebbels methodically poisoned her 6 children rather than let them live in a world without Nazism. Historian Ian Kershaw, one of the world's leading Hitler experts, admitted being disturbed by the film's power. It forces us to confront this uncomfortable truth that Hitler was not an alien, he was one of us. This realization, that history's greatest villain was, biologically speaking, just another human, may be the most unsettling aspect of this landmark film. The Bridge, 1959. The Bridge might be the most devastating anti-war film ever made. Released just 14 years after World War II ended, it follows 7 German teenage boys yanked from school in the war's final days and ordered to defend a meaningless bridge against American tanks. Director Bernhard Wicki showed the absolute senselessness of Nazi Germany's last-ditch defense with unflinching honesty, children dying for nothing. The film begins with these boys in school, flirting with girls and dealing with typical teenage problems, making their subsequent destruction all the more tragic. The film's power comes from its authenticity. It's based directly on author Gregor Dorfmeister's own traumatic experience as a 6-year-old defender of a similar bridge. The teenage actors were almost the same age as the real boys who died. One scene where a boy is severely wounded by machine gun fire was so intense that audiences were deeply shocked in theaters. The German Film Board initially refused classification, calling it too disturbing before relenting. Another sequence shows a boy shooting an American soldier, then breaking down in tears when he realizes what he's done, a moment that multiple German veterans confirmed was common among Hitler youth fighters. What really upset viewers was the film's refusal to portray any side as heroic. The German officers are portrayed as callous leaders sacrificing children, while American soldiers mindlessly attack kids in school uniforms. When it was shown in America, viewers walked out in distress at seeing U.S. troops depicted as harming children. In Germany, former Wehrmacht officers denounced it as a betrayal of German sacrifice. The film shows one boy accidentally killed by friendly fire, another crushed under tank treads while crying for his mother, and a third shot while trying to surrender, all historically accurate details that veterans found too painful to watch. The Bridge won numerous international awards, but was kept out of major American theaters. The U.S. military particularly objected to a scene where American soldiers react inappropriately after harming one of the boys. Wicki, who had spent time in a concentration camp for anti-Nazi activities, refused to modify this scene, saying, "War affects everyone negatively." The film's final moments show just 2 boys surviving, only to be told by a retreating German officer that the bridge they died defending was strategically worthless and scheduled for demolition anyway. Stanley Kubrick called it the best anti-war film I've ever seen, while Steven Spielberg cited it as a major influence on Saving Private Ryan's opening sequence. Perhaps most tellingly, the real bridge that inspired the film still stands in Bavaria, now bearing a memorial plaque that reads, "7 boys died here. They were misused by a criminal regime." Stalingrad, 1993. Stalingrad is the Eastern Front war movie that makes Saving Private Ryan look tame by comparison. Director Joseph Vilsmeier created a bleak landscape following a platoon of German soldiers from the sunny fields of Italy to the frozen nightmare of Stalingrad, where they're systematically destroyed by cold, starvation, and Soviet firepower. It's cinema as trauma therapy for an entire nation. Opening with soldiers sunbathing and flirting with Italian women, the film's dramatic temperature drop as they reach Russia mirrors their moral descent from relatively innocent soldiers to desperate survivors fighting for scraps of bread. The controversy emerged because Vilsmeier refuses to make his German protagonists either villains or victims. They're willing participants who become disillusioned as they witness and commit troubling acts. In one scene, German soldiers mistreat Russian women. In another, they're shown mercy by Soviet civilians. This moral ambiguity frustrated both those who wanted German troops portrayed as purely evil and those seeking a more sympathetic view. The film's depiction of field hospitals, with limbs being amputated without anesthesia and wounded men begging to be put out of their misery, was so realistic that several German veterans walked out of screenings, unable to relive those memories. The production was extremely challenging for its cast. Filming in sub-zero temperatures, actors suffered real frostbite and hypothermia. Star Thomas Kretschmann later revealed he developed stress symptoms from the shoot. "We were forbidden to wash or shave for months," he said. "The dirt was real." Vilsmeier shot using filters that gradually leached color from the film, beginning with warm Mediterranean tones and ending in almost monochrome blues and grays. The cast lived on reduced rations during the final weeks of filming to achieve the emaciated look of soldiers trapped in Stalingrad's pocket. One actor was hospitalized after losing 33 pounds in 6 weeks. Critics were sharply divided. Western reviewers praised its unflinching honesty, while Russian critics accused it of minimizing Soviet sacrifices. In Germany itself, the film triggered nationwide debates about how to portray German soldiers as victims of Hitler or willing accomplices. Particularly controversial was the film's acknowledgement of extreme food shortages among trapped German forces, a historically accurate detail that many veterans had never spoken about publicly. The film's most troubling scene shows the main characters discovering evidence of desperate survival measures by their fellow soldiers. Stalingrad's unrelenting grimness sets it apart from Hollywood war films. There's no triumphant music, no heroic sacrifices, no meaningful deaths, just slow, agonizing destruction. The film's final shot shows the last surviving character freezing to death in the snow, hallucinating about his mother. As German film critic Josef Schnell wrote, "This is not entertainment, this is healing through confrontation." The film's most controversial achievement was forcing Germans to confront a question many preferred to avoid. What would they have done in the same circumstances? As one character says before harming a Russian civilian, "This isn't me. This is what I've become." That uncomfortable reflection on situational ethics remains the film's most disturbing legacy. The Tin Drum, 1979. The Tin Drum isn't just controversial, it's the only film to win the Palme d'Or at Cannes and later be seized by American police as inappropriate content. Volker Schlöendorff's adaptation of Günter Grass's novel follows Oscar, a boy who refuses to grow physically beyond age 3, witnessing the rise of Nazism through a child's eyes while possessing an adult's understanding. It's a surreal, hallucinatory journey through Germany's darkest era. Oscar's main form of protest is beating his tin drum and screaming at a pitch that shatters glass whenever adults try to take it away, a metaphor for childish resistance against overwhelming evil. The film triggered immediate concern for its controversial scenes involving the child protagonist, including inappropriate encounters with an adult woman. The 1-2-year-old actor, David Bennett, had a growth condition that made him appear younger than his age, further complicating ethical questions. In 1997, an Oklahoma judge declared the film inappropriate, resulting in police confiscating copies from homes and libraries, a ruling later overturned by federal courts. The American Family Association spearheaded a nationwide campaign against the film, calling it problematic content masquerading as art. Meanwhile, film scholars defended it as a complex allegory about German moral regression during the Nazi era. Schlendorf faced equal controversy for the film's unflattering portrayal of ordinary Germans embracing Nazism. One scene shows a Nazi rally interrupted when Oscar's drumming causes participants to dance to Polish folk songs instead of marching, a metaphor many Germans found insulting. Another notable sequence shows Oscar hiding beneath the stage while his mother has a relationship with her cousin above him, a scene many critics interpreted as Germany's willing submission to fascism's seduction. The director defended his approach. The fantastical elements allow us to see the horror more clearly than any documentary could. Perhaps most controversial was the film's climactic scene involving unusual imagery with eels, a surreal image representing Germany's decay that caused walkouts at screenings. Equally disturbing was the portrayal of Oscar's presumed father, a Polish postal worker executed by Nazis in the film's most historically accurate sequence, depicting the defense of the Polish post office in Danzig. The film won the Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film despite fierce opposition from conservative groups. Grass himself initially disliked the adaptation but later changed his mind, calling it the visual equivalent of my words. Today, the film remains both celebrated as a masterpiece and condemned as problematic, the exact complicated legacy Schlendorf sought. If people are still arguing about a film decades later, you've done something right. Generation War, 2013. Generation War created intense debate across Europe when it aired as a three-part miniseries. The story follows 5 German friends, 2 soldiers, a nurse, an aspiring singer, and a Jewish tailor, from 1941 through the war's end. What made it controversial wasn't just showing ordinary Germans in World War II, but its suggestion that regular people, not just Nazi fanatics, enabled the Holocaust through small moral compromises. The title itself sparked controversy. Our Mothers, Our Fathers directly challenged Germans to consider their own parents' and grandparents' role in Nazi crimes. The series ignited diplomatic incidents across Eastern Europe. Polish audiences were outraged by the portrayal of Polish resistance fighters as strongly anti-Semitic. The Polish ambassador to Germany formally protested, and the controversy reached such heights that historical commissions in both countries held joint meetings to discuss the show's accuracy. Meanwhile, German critics accused it of downplaying Wehrmacht crimes by portraying the protagonists as reluctant participants. Particularly divisive was a scene where a German soldier tries to save a Jewish woman from harm, suggesting moral redemption was possible for Wehrmacht members. Director Philip Katelbach defended the controversial approach. We wanted to break the silence of our parents' generation. They weren't all monsters, but they weren't all innocent either. The series shows its protagonists witnessing troubling events, sometimes participating, sometimes objecting, but always continuing to serve, a complex moral landscape that satisfied neither those seeking condemnation nor those wanting exoneration. One character, a nurse, directly participates in euthanizing wounded soldiers deemed unfit under Nazi medical protocols, while another, a soldier, watches his unit harm Jewish civilians but does nothing to stop it. What truly shocked viewers was the production quality. With Hollywood-level battle scenes and a budget of 14 million euros, it looked nothing like previous German war films. This high-quality treatment of such dark material led some critics to accuse the filmmakers of creating sensationalized Nazi content. A particularly controversial scene shows one of the protagonists, Wilhelm, harming a Soviet commissar at point-blank range, an unflinching portrayal of German war actions that nonetheless humanizes the perpetrator by showing his subsequent trauma. Jewish groups particularly objected to the character of Victor, the sole Jewish protagonist, whose storyline they felt minimized the Holocaust by making it just one of several parallel narratives. Nevertheless, over 7 million Germans watched it, sparking unprecedented family discussions about grandparents' wartime activities. Schools across Germany organized special viewings, followed by discussions with historians. The series broke viewing records across Europe despite, or perhaps because of, its controversial approach. As one critic noted, "It's not historically perfect, but it accomplished something more important. It got Germans talking about what they had spent decades avoiding." The ultimate controversy may be that Generation War forced a new generation to ask their elders directly, "What did you do during the war?" A question many preferred to leave unasked. The Captain, 2017. The Captain is the most disturbing German war film of the last decade, based on the true story of Willi Herold, a Wehrmacht deserter who found an abandoned captain's uniform in 1945, assumed the identity, and formed a unit of fellow deserters who committed terrible actions under his command. Shot in stark black and white, director Robert Schwentke shows how quickly an ordinary soldier became cruel when given authority. The film begins with Harold crawling through mud, hunted by military police for desertion, before his miraculous discovery of the uniform transforms him into a ruthless authority figure within minutes. The film caused immediate controversy for its unflinching depiction of German-on-German violence. In the most notorious sequence, Harold's fake unit takes over a detention camp and harms over 100 German deserters in an extreme display of violence, all historically accurate. Viewers were visibly distressed during screenings. Schwentke refused to look away from the horror, showing everything from point-blank confrontations to soldiers celebrating their actions. One particularly disturbing scene shows Harold's men subjecting prisoners to extreme humiliation before harming them, while another depicts them burying victims alive, both details taken directly from historical records of Harold's crimes. Critics were deeply divided. Some praised the film's unflinching examination of how ordinary people embrace wrongdoing, while others accused it of excessive depiction. The film's star, Max Hubacher, reported receiving threats from extremist groups who considered the film anti-German propaganda. Meanwhile, Holocaust survivor groups criticized it for focusing on German suffering rather than Nazi victims. Several German theaters hired security guards after screenings devolved into heated arguments between audience members with different interpretations of the film's moral stance. The film's use of black and white photography proved particularly controversial. Critics accused Schwentke of aesthetic stylization, making terrible events look artistically framed. The director defended his choice. Color would make it too real, too immediate. The black and white creates historical distance while paradoxically making the horror more digestible. The film's sound design added to the controversy. During violent scenes, the sounds are unnaturally loud, while human reactions are muffled, creating a disturbing sensory experience that several psychologists questioned as potentially troubling for viewers. The most controversial aspect was the epilogue, showing the real Harold's fate. After harming hundreds, he was captured by British forces, briefly imprisoned, then released and lived a normal life until 1946, when he was rearrested and executed, not for his violent actions, but for stealing a loaf of bread during his desertion. This absurd conclusion led to accusations that the film was criticizing Allied justice rather than Nazi atrocities. Schwentke defended his ending. This isn't just a film about World War II. It's about the human capacity for wrongdoing that exists in all societies. The film's final modern-day scene, showing the actors still in Nazi uniforms walking through contemporary Germany, sparked heated debates about whether the film was suggesting that the capacity for such wrongdoing remains present in modern German society. Look Who's Back. 2015. Look Who's Back pulled off the most daring comedy premise imaginable. Hitler returns to modern Germany and becomes a YouTube star. Based on Timur Vermez's best-selling novel, the film follows Hitler, played by Oliver Masucci, after he mysteriously wakes up in 2014 Berlin. Everyone assumes he's a brilliant method actor, and his rants against modern society make him a viral sensation. Director David WWII frames the film as a satire about how media and political systems might once again enable extremism through entertainment and populism. The film crossed every boundary in German cinema. WWII sent Masucci, in full Hitler costume, to interact with real unsuspecting Germans in Borat-style scenes. The results were shocking. Ordinary citizens enthusiastically took selfies with Hitler, shared their concerning views, and even performed inappropriate gestures. These unscripted encounters revealed disturbing undercurrents of far-right sentiment that many Germans had denied existed. In one particularly alarming sequence, Hitler visits a neo-Nazi headquarters where real extremists share their views with him, unaware they're being filmed with the actual Hitler as their sympathetic interviewer. The controversy exploded when German extremists attended screenings, cheering Hitler's concerning speeches while missing the satirical intent entirely. Several theaters hired security after disagreements between audience members. Critics were deeply divided. Many praised its daring concept, while others condemned it for normalizing Hitler. Jewish groups were particularly concerned, with the head of the German Jewish Council calling it tasteless and trivializing the Holocaust. The film's release coincided with the European refugee crisis, making its satirical portrayal of xenophobia uncomfortably timely. Several politicians accused the filmmakers of deliberately inflaming tensions for publicity. Masucci's performance created its own controversy. Rather than playing Hitler as a cartoonish villain, he portrays him as charismatic, occasionally charming, and genuinely funny, qualities that made many viewers uncomfortable with their own laughter. The actor later revealed the psychological toll of the role. Playing Hitler affected me deeply. I had nightmares for months afterward. Particularly disturbing was how many ordinary Germans in the unscripted scenes expressed that Hitler had some good ideas or that Germany needs strong leadership. Again, exchanges that producers considered cutting but ultimately included as evidence of the film's central warning. What made the film truly unsettling was its ending. After playing the concept for laughs, it suddenly shifts tone to show Hitler's darker influence on modern society, suggesting that Germany remains vulnerable to authoritarianism. This tonal change confounded audiences expecting pure comedy. Nevertheless, it became a massive hit, seen by over 2.5 million Germans and earning nearly 22 million euros. The film won the prestigious German Film Award despite fierce objections. As star Masucci later revealed, "People came up to me on the street saying, 'You know, Hitler wasn't all bad.' That was exactly why we needed to make this film." Perhaps most controversial was the film's suggestion that in the age of viral media and reality television, Hitler's rise might be even easier today than it was in the 1,930 seconds. Sophie Scholl, The Final Days, 2005. Sophie Scholl, The Final Days broke the German film industry's unwritten rule. It portrayed active German resistance to Hitler. Mark Rothamund's film meticulously reconstructs the arrest, interrogation, and execution of two one-year-old Sophie Scholl, member of the White Rose Student Resistance Group, who was beheaded for distributing anti-Nazi leaflets in 1943. Using actual Gestapo transcripts released after the fall of the Berlin Wall, it shows her interrogation virtually word for word. The film's clinical precision makes it all the more devastating. These aren't Hollywood dramatizations, but the actual final words of a young woman facing death for opposing fascism. The controversy came from both directions. Conservatives accused the film of overemphasizing the small German resistance to rehabilitate national pride. Meanwhile, leftist critics attacked it for focusing on one of the few resistance members who wasn't communist affiliated. The film's portrayal of Sophie is motivated partly by Christian faith, particularly frustrated secular critics who felt it misrepresented the resistance's political nature. Several historians pointed out that the film ignores the White Rose's connections to wider resistance networks, creating what they called a simplified martyrdom narrative that made Sophie's actions seem more isolated than they were. What shocked audiences most was the performance by Julia Jentsch as Sophie. Rather than playing her as a flawless martyr, Jentsch shows a scared young woman who initially denies her involvement before finding the courage to proudly confess. This complex portrayal of heroism made some Germans uncomfortable. They preferred their resistance icons more straightforward and saintly. The film shows Sophie briefly considering a false confession to save herself, a human moment that some critics felt diminished her heroism, but that others praised for its psychological realism. The most controversial scene depicts Sophie's actual execution. Rather than cutting away, the camera shows her walking to the guillotine, creating a moment so powerful that during screenings in Germany, audiences reportedly sat in complete silence for several minutes after the film ended. The film's unflinching approach extends to its portrayal of Nazi Judge Roland Freisler, shown shouting at Sophie during her trial, footage that matches historical accounts of his behavior, but that some critics felt bordered on exaggeration. The film triggered a national debate about historical memory. Germany had spent decades acknowledging Nazi crimes, but rarely celebrated those Germans who opposed Hitler. After the film's success, streets and schools previously named for military figures were renamed for White Rose members. As one critic noted, the film challenged Germany's comfortable narrative that resistance was impossible. Sophie Scholl forces us to ask, if she could do it, why couldn't others? The controversy only increased when some far-right groups attempted to appropriate Sophie's legacy, claiming she represented true German values against foreign influences. This led to protests at several screenings, with activists distributing copies of the actual White Rose leaflets to demonstrate how Sophie's anti-fascist message directly contradicted modern right-wing ideology. The Nasty Girl, 1990. The Nasty Girl is the comedy that exposed how small German towns buried their Nazi past. Based on real events, it follows Sonia, a high school student who enters an essay contest on My Hometown during the Third Reich, only to discover her supposedly anti-Nazi town was actually enthusiastically complicit. When she keeps digging, the town's respected citizens resort to threats, vandalism, and even attempted harm to hide their dark history. What makes the film particularly biting is that Sonia's parents and teachers initially encourage her research, believing their town's history to be honorable, only to turn against her when uncomfortable truths emerge. Director Michael Verhoeven deliberately made this dark material into a satirical comedy, using surreal techniques like having characters speak directly to camera and showing Sonia's research as physical battles with archive doors slamming in her face. This approach frustrated critics who felt Nazi collaboration shouldn't be treated comically. Verhoeven defended his choice. Traditional approaches weren't working. Germans were still not confronting their past. Sometimes you need to laugh at the absurdity of denial. Particularly controversial was a scene where town officials accidentally set their own archives on fire while trying to destroy incriminating documents, a comical sequence based on actual events that some felt minimized historical destruction. The film's real-life inspiration, Anja Rasmus, faced such severe harassment in her hometown of Paso that she eventually moved to America. After the film's release, she received threats, and several German theaters showing it were vandalized. Meanwhile, some leftist critics attacked it for focusing on a single, determined individual rather than addressing systemic issues, accusing Verhoeven of promoting an American-style hero narrative. The film's portrayal of Catholic clergy as Nazi collaborators particularly frustrated religious groups in Bavaria who called for boycotts of the film despite historical evidence supporting these depictions. The film's most controversial sequence shows the town's current mayor, a respected pillar of the community, in flashbacks as an enthusiastic Nazi who personally participated in troubling actions against Jewish citizens. This direct connection between present respectability and past wrongdoing concerned many Germans who preferred to see Nazism as a historical aberration rather than something perpetrated by people still in positions of power. Verhoeven based these sequences on actual cases where former Nazi officials continued to hold public office in post-war Germany, but many critics accused him of exaggeration for dramatic effect. What made The Nasty Girl truly controversial was its timing. Released the same year as German reunification, it suggested West Germany hadn't processed its Nazi past any better than the East had dealt with its communist history. This uncomfortable parallel made many politicians frustrated. Nevertheless, the film received an Oscar nomination and won major prizes at the Berlin Film Festival. Its legacy lives on in German education. It's now shown in schools nationwide as a case study in historical denialism, proving that sometimes controversy leads to exactly the conversation a society needs to have. The film's final scene, showing Sonia continuing her research despite social rejection, became a powerful symbol for a new generation of German historians determined to uncover uncomfortable truths about local collaboration during the Nazi era, work that continues to provoke controversy in small towns across Germany today. These films didn't just challenge how we see history, they forced entire nations to confront uncomfortable truths about their past. From humanizing German soldiers to exposing Nazi collaboration, each sparked heated debates that continue today. Unlike Hollywood's often simplified approach to World War II, these German filmmakers explored more complex questions. Where does responsibility begin? How thin is the line between victim and perpetrator? Can we understand wrongdoing without excusing it? Which of these controversial films do you think went too far, or not far enough? Should German cinema focus more on resistance figures like Sophie Scholl, or continue to examine the darker aspects of complicity? And here's the question that divides viewers most sharply. Can we ever truly understand the German World War II experience through film, or does every attempt inevitably either oversimplify or overcomplicate one of history's darkest chapters?